Today we have a government side who believes that simply because the international law system is failing, therefore we should do away with the entire system and just send everyone into exile because that is going to solve the problem. Second, we have a side that decides that for dictators who have killed, as they said, millions, that what we're going to do for them is to create a complete retirement plan for them, complete with a pension for them to live the rest of their lives happily ever after. We think, ladies and gentlemen, that this is in principle wrong, but we also see certain practical harms that we've talked about from the opposition leader's speech. So what I'm going to do in my speech today is to firstly target two issues that have been contended between these two sides. Firstly, on this idea of a disincentive to commit harm, and secondly, actually 3 points. Secondly, the idea of victor's justice, and thirdly, this idea of the feasibility of the opposition counter-model. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, onto this idea of a disincentive to commit harm. Now, this side of the House has characterized that the dictators actually want to hold to power for several reasons, including, ladies and gentlemen, a fear for prosecution. As we've already pointed you out from our points of information on the opposition side. No, thank you, sir. We say that since you acknowledge that the fear of prosecution is actually the fear of prosecution for them is actually something that disincentivizes them to commit harm. We don't see, ladies and gentlemen, why the deterrent that we currently see from the International Criminal Court is insufficient. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, they told us that the dictators also commit harm because they want to create a cult of personality. That is something that's intrinsic to their personality. No, thank you. Thank you, sir. We see that it's precisely because they create a cult of personality within their country that we see that simply sending them off to exile isn't going to change anything because they still will have some sort of lingering influence within the country. No, thank you, ma'am. It is precisely because there's a cult of personality. There are people who have followed them for several years, ladies and gentlemen, who fundamentally believe in their ideology, in their beliefs, who will continue to carry out this very same ideology. We don't think that simply removing a dictator is going to change much. No, thank you, ma'am. And we say, however, that what our counter model does do is that we try to streamline the international court system in order to create a greater disincentive for people not to commit harm because they will have to face up to the consequences. No, thank you, sir. The entire line of the opposition case to this point is that we have to set up a model of consequentialism for these dictators because we believe that it's only by doing so that we prevent further atrocities from happening. As we've shown you, no, thank you, ma'am. As we've shown you, that what ultimately this policy will do is to create an escape route for would-be dictators because they no longer have to fear the prosecution, which, as they have acknowledged, is a very important part of their fear of their deterrent not to commit a crime.
Sir.
No, thank you, sir. Secondly, on this idea of victor's justice, ladies and gentlemen, if they told us that this is going to happen, that they are going to voluntarily step down when their power is waning, we don't see, ladies and gentlemen, that they will still continue to be popular in their country at that point in time, if that's the case that they're trying to highlight for us today. We don't see that a case of victor's justice will result from this. If the people inside the country actually feel that they are being wronged by this dictator, we don't think that they perceive this as victor's justice. No, thank you, sir. But lastly, on this point of the feasibility of our counter model, they said that we can't actually streamline the system. No, ladies and gentlemen, we think that it's very simple. We think that the people won't be willing to give up their dictator. We think that in the situation of power of a dictator whose power is waning, we think that this would actually be quite easy if the people themselves believe that this dictator is bad. So moving on to the substantive of my case, but before that, yes.
At the peak of their power, dictators commit crimes with the feeling that they're bulletproof. When their regimes are unstable, they commit crimes out of paranoia to desperately cling to power. The ICC doesn't scare powerful dictators, but it does drive weak dictators to be more oppressive, desperate, and dangerous.
Now, if you said it drives them to be more desperate than ever before, we say that ultimately what we have to do is to ensure that the ICC prevents this from happening in the first place. But we think, ladies and gentlemen, that there is still a value in a sort of retrospective justice because you're doing away with the entire consequences of them, whether they're weak or when they're strong. So moving on to the substantive argument of my case today. Firstly, on this idea of the public perception of international law. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as my opposition leader has already told you, that international law exists for a purpose. It exists as a sort of plan B for when the national law courts fail. But what they're ultimately doing is making a joke out of it. Why? Because we say that ultimately that you're not carrying out the sort of justice that people would expect of international law. That when a dictator has done something wrong, that they would have to suffer the consequences. Now, and we say that this international legitimacy is extremely important because the international law is supposed to be the keystone to global peace, and it is to act as some sort of a carrier of justice. It's built on these universal values and a belief in the goodwill of the global community. And we think, ladies and gentlemen, to achieve the sort of social effects that the International Criminal Court strives to achieve, to ensure that the people actually believe in the international justice system, to ensure that justice will ultimately be carried out for them. We think that the international community must trust in its ability to carry this out, to ensure that the people would actually have to suffer the consequences, and not, ladies and gentlemen, to give them an escape route where they can then live happily ever after and give them a retirement plan after they've committed these atrocities. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, let's also talk about the bargaining chip the prosecution provides us with. No, thank you, sir. We think that ultimately what you do is that you basically tip the scales that we might have in some sort of negotiation or try to get these people out of power. Because we say that this fear of prosecution is, we think that this fear of prosecution is something that actually drives these dictators to not commit those atrocities. But we think that a very intrinsic problem in this model that's proposed by the opening government is that since you say that you're going to give them immunity, and you show them that you're willing to concede a lot of things simply for them to step down, we think that you will basically incentivize them to attach a lot of conditions to their departure from their office. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we think that given their characterization of these dictators as people like kleptocrats, as people who love power, who love money, we think that they'll be willing, they'll try to get the best retirement plan possible, and also associate a lot of benefits and a lot of conditions to their departure from the office. We don't think, ladies and gentlemen, that this is a good thing. Why? Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, we think that it's important that these dictators actually get a treatment that they deserve, instead of a life which they can live happily to the end of their days. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we think that there's also a sort of value in retrospective justice, that we need to face up to the consequences and ensure that the victims who have suffered a lot at the hands of these dictators to feel the sort of comfort that they need to feel. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge for this proposition to be rejected.